Okay, we are live.
We are.
Hey, everybody, welcome to tonight's Mentionable Apologetic Theater. Tonight, we look at Disney and Pixar's Soul. Is it trying to peddle your children new age scuba? Or is it another hit from Pixar? We'll discuss both sides and dive into how parents should handle going over this movie with their family. Go ahead, Joel. What were you going to say?
I said, can it be both?
Could be, maybe. I guess we'll find out. Listeners will have to hang around and see. I just noticed I named He Who Shall Not Be Named. So that took all of 3 seconds.
Nobody got the first word, so.
Yeah. While we're at it, let's do some introductions. I'm Caleb Johnston. Over here, this direction, He Who Shall Not. Okay. And right down here somewhere,
Clinton Wilcox.
All right. Hey, we're off to a great start talking over each other. That's excellent. So I think we've got a little bit of delay. I'll try and be more understanding of that moving forward. So tonight, go.
Oh, no problem. I'm actually hearing quite a bit of a delay from Joel. You look to be okay, Caleb, but Joel really seems like he's on a delay. In fact, he actually looks. Oh, never mind. I was going to say he looks like he's frozen, but no, he's good. I saw him blink.
You know, the best moments of the show recently have been those moments where we say something to Joel and he just completely freezes and then he pops back as his doppelganger. So, comedy gold.
That's true. And sometimes you get them both on at the same time.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, tonight's movie that we're looking at, been a while since we've done a Mentionables apologetic theater. But we're actually doing a really recent movie. We looked at quite a few older movies last time we did this. But tonight we're looking at a really recent one. This was just released back on Christmas Day on streaming on Disney Plus. And this is the new Pixar movie, Soul. With a title like that, you would suspect it's dealing with the afterlife in some capacity. And I would say that's accurate. Not that their view they give is accurate, but that it deals with the supernatural and spiritual.
Is it really afterlife, though?
Yeah, you're right. All right. Let's give listeners an introduction to get into things here. You want to give us a little rundown of what the movie's about? And by the way, the spoiler warning here shortly as well, so listeners can avoid that should they choose to.
Okay, so the movie is a double entendre in the title. It's using the word soul in sort of the cultural sense of kind of like the black music, phenomena of jazz and how that developed into its own sort of cultural genre of music. And then it stars a gentleman who is a music teacher at a school, at a middle school, but secretly he's always wanted to be a jazz musician. And he's very talented, but like most talented musicians, has never had his sort of break. And so the movie opens with him in the school, and shortly after his class, they offer him a full-time position with all of the benefits and pay, which is a pretty good deal, pretty good offer. And so he goes home with that, and he's single, He's a single adult, sort of living on his own, but he has pretty close family ties to it. So he goes to the establishment owned by his mother. Well, oh yeah, his mother's a tailor. She sells clothes, and tells her about it. And his mother really pushes him to accept the offer. I mean, this is the first break he's had in his adult life. He can get a full-time job. He can get good pay. He's got job security, the whole deal. And then later that day, he gets contacted by an old student, and the student offers him an audition with a very well-known popular musician, a jazz musician. And so, of course, he can't pass up that opportunity. And so he goes and auditions, and they're really impressed with him. And so they offer him the position. And so at this point in the movie, he's kind of stuck in a point in his adult life that very similar to things I've experienced, where he's got sort of the option of following his dream, which is a risk because there's no job security. It's all, every gig is its own thing. You could lose it all easily enough, but it's the thing he's always wanted to be. Or he could take a more mundane job that, it's doing the thing he likes. He's doing music, but it's not the thing he loves, which is performing. And but there's no risk involved. So do you take the risk and do the thing you love, or do you take the security and do a thing that you're okay with? So, his mother doesn't want him to take the gig. She wants him to continue working at the school and take the job security because she's a mother and she cares about him. And so he's caught in this sort of existential crisis, and he goes walking home. And then it goes to the sequence where he's not paying attention to what he's doing as he walks, and he's in the middle of New York City in the very crowded streets. And so there's this sort of almost Warner Brothers animation-esque scenario where he's just walking down the street and cars are almost going to hit him and things are falling from buildings and almost hit again. And he's just cheerfully oblivious to all of it. And, he's moments from home, and then he steps down an open manhole and falls. And at this point, it indicates that maybe he's passed on to the great beyond because his soul exits his body and goes on to the great beyond, where he kind of stands on this escalator that's heading up towards this kind of giant ball of all-consuming light. And he's seeing these souls just kind of being sucked up the escalator along with him. And disappearing into this light that almost kind of vaporizes him. So there's this sort of ominous feeling to it. It's not like the light at the end of the tunnel, the soft light that you drift up to heaven. It's just this sort of consuming ball of light that's vaporizing the spirits as they enter. And so he's not cool with that. He doesn't want, he's still interested in living his life and taking the gig that he was offered. And so the rest of the movie is him trying to get back into his body so that he can finally do his dream job. And so he goes through some shenanigans in the spirit world, and then he ends up meeting another soul, let's call it, who's this very cynical girl who's just sort of weary world. And he manages to get back into his body, but he falls with her, and she gets in his body, and he ends up in a cat. And then they have zany adventures where he's trying to get his body with this cynical girl in it to go back and get the gig and, turn his life around. And he's doing so as a cat, and only she can understand him. To the rest of the world, he's just meowing like a cat. And so they have some zany adventures, and, the movie goes on from there, and it's a typical Pixar movie, and it ends with a tear in your eye, but there's kind of a happy ending to it. And I won't do the whole thing. Anyway, you get the idea.
Yeah, thanks for giving us the rundown there, Joel. I don't think we'll have too many other spoilers tonight. I mean, we're discussing general themes of the movies, but as with most of these, that's about as spoilery as it gets. We're not going to ruin any of the Pixar jokes for you. That's always the best part with these, is they have some really clever jokes. And I didn't think this was any exception. They had some really clever, over top of the kids' head jokes that especially early on, cracked me up a lot. So that was definitely a positive.
And if you were comparing it with all Pixar movies, I would say it was slightly better, slightly above average, but definitely not the best that they've ever done. In terms of sort of tear-jerking things, which is kind of a hallmark of Pixar movies, it was sentimental, it was emotional, but it wasn't one that left you in tears at the end, at least not me. And in terms of humor, again, it was a little above average, but definitely not the best thing they've ever done.
How does it compare to Inside Out?
I would say Inside Out was probably the better of the two.
Okay, because I actually haven't seen Soul, but I have seen Inside Out, and it actually the whole storyline about the musician who never got any breaks sounds like it hit a little close to home for me.
Yeah, no, I as a creative person, I've kind of been there myself, so not in music, but in other fields. But no, I mean, yeah, it was very comparable to Inside Out in a lot of ways, because it sort of happens in the sort of mental or spiritual world, with flashes towards real life versus the spirit, the spiritual aspect of it. So yeah, it had a lot of similarities.
Yeah, I would take Inside Out any day. I think humor and just the plot of the movie were just a lot better than this in terms of how Inside Out was done. Not to say this was bad, but it definitely had a more convoluted worldview, if you will, behind it, which I think even made it difficult for my kids to get into in places, just because it does have those moments that can tend to lose people.
Yeah, it sounds like it kind of took inspiration from the old Looney Tunes cartoons, because they would have a Looney Tunes where one of the characters would die and go into the escalator up to heaven, and then of course there'd be the escalator down to hell also.
Yeah, there was definitely elements of that. I mentioned the sequence where he's just kind of walking along. You remember in Animaniacs, they did this thing where the baby would get loose and be going through the world and nearly avoiding death at every moment. And the dog would be chasing after her and saving her from thing after thing and taking the abuse for her. It was kind of like that.
But now here's the most important question, though. Did the Grim Reaper come back with him to start a band?
I don't think they had an Avatar of Death in this one. I might be wrong, but that seems like a missed opportunity. Caleb, do you remember any sort of Avatar of Death?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I guess you could put the accountant sort of in that position, but that's not one specifically. No.
Yeah, this is a gag that runs through the film where he died. He was supposed to be on the escalator to the afterlife, and he got off the escalator somehow. And there is. Are you familiar with the what is it, Discworld series?
No.
All right. Well, I'll make a Discworld reference for our listeners in case anybody is in the Discworld series, which is, I don't know, it's complicated, but there are these auditors that are essentially they take the place of God collectively, because they keep track of every single thing in the world, and they're obsessed with numbers and keeping things straight. And when things go awry in the book series, little metaphysical things happen that ought not to happen. These auditors mobilize as a force, and they're an awesome and terrible force to be seen of the universe, but they have to keep everything in order. They have a similarity in the film. They've got this guy who keeps track of all the spirits that go into the afterlife, and he loses one. And so he's got to go into this sort of giant cosmic filing system and try to find out what happens. And then he chases them down to Earth, and he's trying to get the guy to get back to the afterlife where he belongs. So that happens. Clinton, have you ever seen the IT Crowd?
Yes, I saw one or two episodes. I couldn't get into it. I tried my best because it sounded like a show that was right up my alley, but I just didn't find it funny. I didn't see what people saw in the IT Crowd.
How about you, Caleb? IT Crowd at all?
Mm-mm.
Now,
Yes.
now I did watch The Good Place, and the premise that you were describing actually sounds
Now,
pretty similar to
I
The Good
brought up
Place.
IT Crowd for a very specific reason. There's a character in that, and he's sort of the Sheldon of that show, meaning that he's a character, but his personality and characteristics sort of absorb the show, just because he's such a quirky and fun-loving character. And his name is Moss. And the reason I bring him up is that his voice is what they used for the accountant or auditor or whatever he was. And that was delightful to me because I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, but the premise of that show really, or book series or whatever it was, really reminds me of The Good Place. Sounds pretty similar to that.
I have not seen that at all.
Okay. Well,
now the feature of the feature of the movie, the thing that I didn't really get into much, is not the afterlife. It's what you might call the pre-life, and it gets into sort of a new agey kind of thing where all souls come from a place and eventually enter the world, and it didn't have elements of reincarnation in it that I saw, but there are some similarities to reincarnation in that your souls live a life prior to life, and carry over characteristics that they develop in this sort of pre-life state as they enter bodies and inhabit the world. Almost, you could make connections to Mormonism, but that would be a stretch, I suppose.
Well, let me do that real quick. So,
all right, jump on
the one major theological piece from this movie that does have ties to Mormonism is the pre-existence of the soul. Mormons believe that the soul has pre-existed every human, that they've existed since they were created by God, and they have both a pre-existence and a post-existence. So that certainly did have elements of kind of Mormonism. It's the first thing that occurred to me, just in terms of this pre-existence idea that's raised very early on in the movie.
So yeah, in terms of the pre-existence, it's this general concept that souls have to kind of form a purpose and have to, I don't know, form features of a soul prior to entering the body, which is kind of, obviously as a psychologist or somebody working in that field or studying the field, anyway, whatever I am, there's this idea of you coming into the world in sort of a blank slate, the tabula rasa type state, and then you develop your personality and characteristics through life experiences, with possibly some input from genetics and so forth. But the film had more of a idea that you have a quote unquote spark, which is, what it reminded me of? Because I have children, it reminded me of My Little Ponies and the Cutie Mark. Any of you know anything that I'm talking about?
I do. I have nieces that watch that show.
Okay. Well, Caleb, you probably recall the My Little Pony toys from the 1980s.
Right.
You know how each of them had like a little picture on emblazoned on their butt?
Yes.
Or their back haunch. And, the pony that was supposed to be the sunny one had a sunshine. It was kind of a Care Bears type thing.
Right.
That's the quote unquote cutie mark. And the cutie mark kind of forms their personality and their purpose and everything.
Okay.
And the way in which it reminds me is in the new My Little Pony show, you don't get your cutie mark until you hit like adolescence. And until then, it's sort of this perpetual search for what your purpose is, and you're so excited to find out what kind of picture will develop on your haunches to, determine what kind of, what your purpose and mission and personality will be.
We really should have Nick here to discuss this.
Is he a brony?
He's a brony.
A brony.
And he's kind of made it a mission to make me a brony too. I'm like, no, thank you. But actually, awesome. Yeah, I did watch one episode of My Little Pony of my own volition because Weird Al Yankovic did a voice of one of the ponies.
That's a good enough reason.
So yeah.
Anyway, so what I've just described. Well, yeah. Go ahead, Clinton.
Oh no, I mean it's it's on the topic of My Little Pony, but not really on the topic of the soul. But I was just going to say that one day when my nieces were watching an episode of My Little Pony, I was actually surprised to hear John Delancey's voice coming out of one of the characters. John Delancey, of course, was Q on the Star Trek shows.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
He played a dragon called Discord.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Sorry, I have children. I am not myself a brony. I swear. Oh, at any rate, so yeah, in the movie that we're discussing, in a sort of pre-life type thing, you have these pre-souls that are running around like little children. They're, kind of like in a toddler type state. And there's different like centers that they send them to. And the center kind of determines the personality, and they sort of, divide them up randomly. They're like, you two, you go to sunny personality. And you two, you go to sort of a dismal personality, and they're sending them to different conferences to determine their personality. And there's a gag in there where it's talking about how, all right, let's have these 10 go over to the self-centered, and something else, but it was kind of a crack on millennial, this idea of millennials, what do you call it, a stereotype. Yeah, it was a crack on the stereotype, and she's like, we gotta stop sending people there. So many of them. But so that happens. But in addition to going to these buildings, they find their spark by getting mentors. And the mentors are apparently these, great figures from history that, so you'd have like, I don't know. Aristotle, Leonardo da Vinci, Sigmund Freud, the whole deal,
Mother Teresa.
There you go. Yeah, Mother Teresa, recognizable names. And then Sun Tzu, like Art of War. And and then, the special souls will get their mentor, and that'll help them find their sparks so that they can go on and live life. And this guy, our main character, he is running away from having to go to the afterlife, and he ends up, grabbing the name tag for one of the mentors. And so he ends up in the mentor program accidentally without intending to. And that's where he meets.
That's how most mentor programs work.
Yeah. He meets the cynical, like, soul character there, and she's been there for like thousands upon thousands of years, and she's never found her spark, and she's had like all of the best mentors from across history. So she'll just like throughout the movie, she'll just bring up, Sun Tzu once told me that you should really divide and conquer. That's kind of a running gag with her. Is she'll pull out these famous names from out the hat and say humorous things related to them. So that's a thing, and she's the one that ends up in this guy's body. And of course, as a sort of cynical character who's never actually owned a body before, that's a whole gag that they go through. But yeah, Caleb, you want to bring some sort of religious connotations in here?
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the point of this discussion is to give people an idea of how to handle this. And I'll say this: I give the director some respect in doing kind of some of my reading for this and looking at it. I've stumbled on a interview that he had did, and now it's going to have left my screen. So hold on just a second. It's hiding here somewhere. But anyway, he did this interview discussing kind of motivations behind the movie and why tackle such a big subject. And what he said was Doctor is his last name. Doctor believes that it's important to ask questions in regards to questions about the afterlife. And he thinks that maybe we should ask them of ourselves more often. And that was our hope, really from the get-go. He says, it's not like we ever hoped to answer the question of what's life about. That's ridiculous to think you could, but at the very least, we hope we would incite some good conversations and make people go, okay, we've got to go get some coffee and talk about this.
Yeah, I didn't get a New Agey vibe from, well, okay, they made some New Age references, but it seemed like it was part of the gag. It was,
Right. See, up to kind of the area we've described, until they get to the zone, I had very few concerns about this movie. The pre-existence is something easy enough to discuss and deal with, and it really didn't get much beyond a very general pre-life spiritual realm kind of issue. There's even these spiritual beings that you could very easily represent as angels of some kind, which they were all abstracted, which was kind of interesting. It reminds me of actually the biblical descriptions of angels with these eyes and wings. It kind of caught the same vibe for me.
yeah, they were like two-dimensional lines, and they would mold to whatever was the appropriate shape for the task that they were doing. So if they were transporting children, they would become sort of this camel type thing with holding spaces for each of, for groups of children that they could walk along as this giant creature. But it was like a two-dimensional line that would trace the sort of dimensions of whatever it is that they're supposed to be. So it was almost like a Sesame Street type thing. But yeah, I mean, as abstracts, and they represented spiritual creatures, but not much beyond that. There wasn't like any. I didn't catch any obvious references to spiritual entities within any sort of religion. And I thought that was probably appropriate because it made the film accessible to anybody.
Yeah, I agree. That was one of the things that had me kind of on board with this film to begin with, was the fact that, okay, they're trying to do something very general. Of course, they're going to step on some toes somewhere along the line, but they're at least making an effort here to try and do a very general afterlife, before life, spiritual kind of view, which, like I said, I can respect that. The way they approached it was okay, and it didn't really raise any concerns for me until they got to the zone. And when they got there, they really brought the New Age elements in pretty heavy.
Yeah, heavy enough that it seems like it was part of the gag to me. Well, I mean, like,
maybe.
See, they run into these characters, and they're like, oh, okay, I'm Moon Spirit, he's Spirit Moon. That's Moon of the. They all have some kind of variation on the same sort of New Agey name, and then they represented almost stereotypes of New Age characters, New Age enthusiasts, let's call them, and so and everything was. To me, it seemed like they were pulling stereotypes just to be a gag, but
yeah, I mean, I can kind of see that, and I think that's what my first inkling as trying to kind of think about it in response was. After watching some of those scenes over a couple of times, I will say that it raised a few concerns, because they mention a crown chakra. They go into transcendental kind of meditation as a way to communicate and connect the spiritual and the physical. So they pulled in a few more concepts than I found necessary, and maybe they were just plot devices. It's quite possible it was just a plot device. But it felt as if they pulled these things in extensively enough that maybe there was some support for a New Age spirituality as kind of being the driving force of this movie. The elements of reincarnation, I think Joel kind of pointed to, of spirits inhabiting different bodies that may or may not be their own. And, it's this whole act of transcendental meditation, trying to reunite Joe with his body. That's, again, a major plot figure in this movie. Had they left out some of the more specific terminology and really just steered it in a general direction, I probably could have bought into the fact that this is just a plot device for humor to kind of keep things moving forward. But I definitely got some New Age vibes from it.
Can I make a counterpoint?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, the New Age vibes were obvious, and I think that was on purpose. I mean, they were presenting something that was New Agey, and it's a cartoon, so you kind of have to sort of go superlative to make it obvious. And then, it was definitely a plot device, but it existed for two reasons. The first reason was to, dangle. It was kind of a red herring. It was dangling that hope that this new age guru could somehow reunite him with his proper body and, solve it. And so they, part of the movie was them trying to get back to this new age guru for him to fix the situation where they're in the wrong bodies. And so, there's this whole period of time where they're preparing, and it's giving them a destination to go as they're going through the antics of trying to, one of them being a cat and the other being in a body she's not, she doesn't recognize. So yeah, there was a plot device element there, but ultimately that didn't happen. The New Age guru didn't fix the problem. He didn't reunite him with the body. There's nothing there. And then the second part of the plot device was more essential, which is that he introduces this idea that when you're sort of in a moment of inspiration, when you get that runner's high, let's say, or in his case, he's a musician, and there's this moment as you're performing that you kind of transcend and you really get into the music. And, the concept there is that for a second, your soul goes to this other level. And again, that sounds new agey, but it's important to the plot because he needed to go back and communicate at the spirit plane to kind of talk to this girl he's been mentoring the whole movie. And there's no other way to get him there than either kill him again or have him perform and transcend for a moment to get there. So in that sense, yeah, it's a plot device. Now, one thing you could argue is that the whole reason that these new age people go into these meditations and go to this other level is that they're trying to quote unquote free souls. And that is, the example they gave is there's this accountant who's been in the soulless job so long that he's just kind of, his actual soul has become trapped and in this other realm, and it's become sort of this monster because of the crushing routine that he's gone through his whole life. And so they're there to kind of rescue these lost souls and to provide inspiration and return them to the body. So yeah, that's kind of a new agey type thing, and they brought that in. But again, I think that was a plot device for what happens at the end. So yeah, I mean, it was necessary to the plot, but I don't think it was the point of the plot.
Yeah, a movie where the protagonist dies, the protagonist needs to get back into his body so that he can solve the problem that's been established by the show. Now, I haven't seen the movie, like I said, so there might be some other undertones there, but this really doesn't sound like reincarnation so much as it is reanimation, because they had to bring the dead character back to life, even though it's they got in the wrong bodies. Because I think of Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey as kind of my go-to film like this. I kind of alluded to it earlier, but Bill and Ted are killed by evil robot thems from the future, and because they have to form a band and play this big concert, and so they get prematurely killed, so they have to go through hell and heaven to convince God to put them back in their bodies, and so it's in the same way, it's just kind of a plot device because they have to complete their objective, but they were killed prematurely, so they have to find their way back into their bodies in order for them to have a happy ending. So yeah, it sounds more like a plot device than really anything else. But yeah, again, there might be some undertones there that I'm unfamiliar with, but that's pretty much a plot device in any film or show like this where someone is killed before they're able to complete their objective. As well, of course, that happens probably all the time in real life for the purpose of a narrative through a film. It has to work out.
Right. One of you guys made the statement about Looney Tunes. This dates all the way back to Looney Tunes. There's shows where Sylvester dies and he goes to the other place, and he begs to go back to his body, and they're like, "Well, you've been a bad pussycat," and he's like, "I'll turn it around," and then he goes back and he tries not to chase the bird. And, that happens 9 times because cats have 9 lives. And, So yeah, it's an aged kind of narrative for cartoons.
Yeah, and I think where it crossed a little bit of a line for me, I actually find it hard to see myself on this side pushing back so hard against this, because I'm usually pretty flexible about entertainment and even the use of some kind of mystical elements within stuff. Like, I'm not out here to bash Harry Potter and attack it.
You're
As
one of
well.
those homeschool parents.
Yeah, no. So, I find it weird that I was disturbed by this movie as I was in some ways. Now, don't get me wrong. We'll get into I think it's a good movie for people to watch with their kids. I don't have a problem with it in that sense, but there are these troubling elements that I don't think are necessary and I think are problematic in a kid's movie. And I think it's probably, like I said, I get that it being a plot narrative piece, but the fact that they actually go through this meditation process and it's Joe's failing of it that actually puts them in the wrong bodies, is because he doesn't listen to them long enough. He doesn't follow through and take his time on the meditation. I think it's the fact that they're actually pulling in these practices of astral projection, and that's what disturbs me about it, is it makes these elements be almost like a critical piece of spiritual life. And as you mentioned, these mystics without borders are there pulling out lost souls. They really are the kind of heroes of the zone, if you will. So the really positive portrayal of new age concepts did bother me and disturb me to a certain level, that it's like, I really wouldn't want my kids watching this without me being there with them.
Yeah, so that's a fair point, and I think that if they had picked a specific religious element, that would have narrowed the appeal of the movie to people, because New Ageism, there's not a lot known about it in the general public. It's just sort of this wacky thing that's out there that some people do. It was less toxic or radioactive to put that in there, because it wouldn't turn a lot of people off. Whereas if they put a Christian narrative there, there's a lot of people who would have balked at that. So yeah, I mean, it might have been a choice of the director because it was quote unquote safe.
Yeah, I can see your point there. We still may disagree on whether it was a good choice or not, but I definitely see your point, and I suspect that probably was the case. I don't think, from everything I've read, that this movie is a deliberate effort to shove New Age ideas down people's throats. But the fact of the matter is that these elements are still out there, and this is a kids movie that a lot of kids are going to sit around and watch again and again on their couch without any supervision or guidance, and they may start to wonder about some of these things. Older kids may start to look it up. So it certainly raised concerns for me.
That's fair.
Yeah. Have you guys ever seen Beverly Hills Ninja?
A long time ago.
Okay, whenever I hear someone mention astral projection, that's the first thing I think of, is Chris Farley trying to move around while he's trying to astral project to meet his brother. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So those things do, I think, stick with people, especially kids. And I'm not. Maybe we'll come back to this here in just a little bit before we kind of talk about that. If there's anything else we need to bring up or discuss in the movie before we kind of talk about kind of practical application and how parents may want to handle this.
Well, I mean, there sounds like there could be a discussion about what the nature of the soul is, because it sounds like the perspective of the film is that the soul is an immaterial thing that comes to inhabit a body, but that's not really the Christian conception of the soul. Um, so, there's always a discussion there. Some people talk about substance dualism and how, like Cartesian dualism, um, what some atheists use it as a criticism that that Cartesian dualism implies that you can actually have multiple people inhabiting a body, which then I've heard William Lane Craig respond to that and say, well, yeah, that's not really a problem for a Cartesian dualist because, we read in scripture that people had demons inhabiting their bodies. So it's entirely possible that that one person could have multiple persons inside them because of like demon possession and things like that. Um, but that's only one possible conception of the soul that some Christians hold to.
Yeah, and this one, it's hard to really say for certain, but it tended, from what I saw, to be fairly consistent with the monism of New Age. So the manifestations within the spiritual had a physical effect on people. So when they were trapped as these lost souls, it was the mental that had to be fixed in order to have an impact on the body. And that's one of the distinctive features of New Age is, in general, you get this very monism kind of view that everything really is mind, and your mind impacts what goes on in the physical. So there were elements of dualism within it, I think, but they really didn't draw a clear distinction as to whether they're saying it's a dualistic nature versus this kind of New Age view.
Which view is the ghost in the machine view? Because that seems to be what it was. You could shove any spirit into a body, and that would be, the motivating force behind that body at that time.
Yeah, I've heard some people say that's the Cartesian dualist conception, but I've also heard from philosophers that I know that Cartesian dualism really isn't Ghost in the Machine. The Ghost in the Machine is kind of a straw man of what Cartesian dualists actually hold to. But I'm not knowledgeable enough in philosophy of mind to really say for certain one way or the other. But I think that tends to be what most people think of when they think of the Ghost in the Machine kind of thing, is a kind of a Cartesian dualism.
Yeah, the only slight variation maybe was the fact that when this sort of cynical girl gets in his body, she has access to all of the knowledge in his brain, so she's able to retrieve memories and information that he knows in his brain, but she is the motivating spirit behind the body. So
yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, because that then you get into, well, does the soul have any sort of control over things like the memories and things like that? Because someone like J.P. Moreland would actually say that memories, that the soul actually has a key I'm not sure how we phrase it. I really need to see if I can contact him and talk about this with him one of these days. But because he believes that something like, and this is just what I've heard. I don't know what, I'm probably not getting this 100% correct, but he holds a view similar to, from what I've been told, that it's actually the soul that controls most of the body. Like the soul actually controls the development of the human body and things like that. And so it's actually, if the body is missing the soul, then in reality, if another soul came to inhabit the body, it may not be that she would then have access to all of the memories. Because that also kind of raises the question, if the girl who came to inhabit his body has access to his memories, then why would he, who comes to inhabit a cat, have access to all of his memories? It seems like he shouldn't remember anything, even after he dies and goes to this heavenly realm. He shouldn't remember anything if his memories are in fact tied to his body. So it seems like that would be kind of a, something that they, that wouldn't, that the implication of that would be that they shouldn't remember anything if they leave the body.
Yeah, that's a really solid point. I mean, these are writers of a cartoon movie, so I'm sure they didn't put that much thought into it. But yeah, if you're going to go down that route, then The question is, how is it that she can come into his body and have all of her memories from pre-life? Because she'll, like I said, there's this running gag where she'll reference this, super famous person from history and what they told her one time, and she's still doing that while she's inhabiting his body. So
right,
she's got these pre-life memories, which,
yeah, and that of course raises the question: well, how was she storing memories when she was in this heavenly realm, getting wisdom from all of these characters? If it's actually the body and the brain that stores all of your memories.
Well, we've just dug a tremendous plot hole in this movie, so
yeah. Maybe I can start a movie criticism channel like CinemaSins and make some money.
Yeah, just bring philosophy in, and it ruins everything all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
pretty much.
You'll be that guy.
Yep.
No, it's weird because some of the most convincing arguments I hear made for dualism or the reality of the soul are from people who are otherwise sort of on the new agey side, and that's a little bothering to me, only because of that's a really good point, but I disagree with these guys on everything.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm the one that's wrong.
Well, it's tricky because, and again, this goes back to one of the reasons this movie reminds me of New Age so much, is the one thing New Age does in a way that I think Christians could learn from, is the fact that they make it very clear that different religions are paths to the same thing. So it's very all-encompassing. I'm not saying that we should be open to multiple paths to God. The Bible makes it very clear that if Christianity true, Jesus is the way. However, I think we can do a better job of not focusing on differences as much as we focus on how there are elements of truth within religions. There's a book by Dr. McDermott called What Can We Learn from World Religions? And it does a great job of looking at this concept of how can we better relate to other worldviews and what elements of truth are contained within those worldview. I think that's something that's very valuable for Christians to learn and look at. And so you could look at a movie like Soul and say, hey, here's where we really can pull the truth out of this. And here's where we get these things from versus just tearing things down.
If I may grab that thread and run with it for a second. I've made the argument in the past, I think on this show as well, where I brought in research that sort of supports this idea that we inherently, from childhood, from as early as we're able to measure, have this concept of, unseen minds and sort of design or purpose behind things, behind everything. And this is just sort of an instinct that we have as human beings. Now, that could be, you could form that into an argument for, what do you call it? Inherent knowledge of God. What was Calvin's term for that?
Is that the sensus divinitatis?
There you go, the sensus divinitatis. You could make that an argument, and I have. But, in my continuing research, it's been pointed out to me, and I think it's a solid point, that this concept of an unseen mind can develop in any direction, including the idea of a fairy realm, or brownies running around your house stealing. Well, maybe I should say pixies, because brownies are leprechauns. There you go. But we'll call them leprechauns, running around your house stealing your keys and buttons and things, and that's why they disappear. And so you got this internal sense of an unseen mind, but that unseen mind could be anything. And so every culture kind of takes that sense and develops it into their own mythology, if you will, of unseen things. And so, but what Caleb is pointing out here is that there's sort of this search for truth that exists within all religions. We're all interested in the truth. None of us is trying to get out there and deliberately deceive ourselves. And so I have thought about it in the past as you have this concept of an unseen mind, and it has been the project of human civilization to pursue and define what that mind is. And so it's almost this sense of, erecting a stone and painting a face on the stone and calling that God, and then trying to explore what that means. You're giving a face to something that you have an internal sense to, and then you're trying to discover what that internal sense means in the exploration. And I've made this argument as well over time, is that what you see with religions, if you give them enough time, is that they all sort of migrate into a sort of almost Christian-esque monotheism. Because you have Zarathustra, for instance, he comes into like Turkey, Iraq kind of area, into a highly polytheistic culture. And he raises sort of philosophical questions about, how can you have multiple ultimate beings who only inhabit, limited realms? And so he eventually wipes the slate clean and gives one ultimate being. He's like, okay, this is more consistent. But then he has a philosophical problem with the one ultimate being, and that is that there is both good and evil in the world. And, there's chaos and there's construction kind of thing. And so he decides that within this one ultimate being, there are two forces, like a split mind, if you will. One is a destructive force and one is a creative force. And, he's sort of neutral about the issue of good and evil. There is no good or evil, so you can side with either the creative or destructive force, and whichever gets the most members wins, kind of thing. So but obviously, he's progressing away from polytheism towards monotheism as he goes and develops his philosophy. And you see the same thing with the sort of progression of Greek philosophers. Socrates rejected the pantheon. Right. And then after Socrates was Plato, and Plato really developed upon Socrates and came up with this idea of a realm of unseen, an unseen realm of forms, if you will, which is not the same thing as gods. And then he decides that at the center of this realm is the good, and this is sort of the genesis of all good things, all values, beauty and justice and all of these things, which starts to resemble Christian monotheism. And so you have in Greek philosophy, over time, if you give it enough time, it progresses towards a sort of Christian-esque monotheism. And you hate to say it, but you see the same thing in Islam. You have Muhammad come along, and he goes into the Kaaba and breaks all the idols and swipes it off. And then, if there's one thing that Islam is about, it's monotheism. That's like the heart and soul of Islam is one God kind of thing. And so, what I'm saying is that we start with this idea of an unseen mind. We pursue that, and over time, if you give religions enough time, they progress in this idea that there must be a single fundamental source of value, and we call that source God. That's that was my rant. Continue.
Okay, so if I can summarize this back to you just a little bit, I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. It sounds like you're kind of, and I know we've talked about this some, but in a nutshell, it sounds like you're saying you believe that there is a funnel within religions that eventually funnels down to kind of some of these core concepts. Is that a fair characterization of it, I guess?
I would say that religion is a project, and it is a project of trying to discover the truth behind the universe. Now, that is not to say that all religions contain that truth. All religions are in pursuit of that truth. And if you give a religion enough time, and by time I'm talking about decades, centuries, millennia, however long, because Islam, not Islam, Hinduism has been around as long as Judaism, It's one of the, if not the oldest religion that we can trace back in time through writings and so forth.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that religions are projects in pursuit of truth. And if you give a religion long enough, as it continues to pursue the truth, it comes to the same conclusion that we as Christians have come to, that the universe is founded upon fundamental laws, and that those laws exist within a single unseen mind, and we call that mind God. And to us, God has been revealed through the person of Jesus Christ.
That's fair. I think I would agree with most of that. And it was I think it was a valuable train of thought because it really took where I was going and expanded on it. So, yeah. Was there anything else within the movie from a spiritual side of things, or any other elements we need to kind of bring in and talk about?
Did I pick up on a subtle nod to Egyptian mysticism in there? With like some of the forms the spirits took. And what was that thing she said? Like quiet jackal or.
Yeah. I'm sure there were probably a few references in there that I just missed. As with most Pixar movies, they crammed a bunch of stuff in. I seem to remember something along those lines. I couldn't put my finger on the exact line it was, though.
Well, if we're going to look at spiritual elements, it's interesting to me. First of all, they make the afterlife, sort of the great beyond that you go to after you die, sort of an intimidating or, an intimidating thing, a dreadful thing, because it's this giant, like, humming ball of chaos. Well, not chaos, I suppose, but it looks like a fireball that's consuming everything.
Right.
If that fireball was white. So it's this thing that he's trying to escape this whole time, and it makes the afterlife seem like a undesirable thing in that sense. But then again, you have this concept of these great human beings throughout history, who have died, so they're in the afterlife, but they somehow get pulled over to the U seminar. For listeners who want to listen and haven't seen the movie, the U seminar was sort of the rebranding that they gave the pre-life so that it sounded friendly, I suppose. But you have these great characters from history whose souls have been pulled from the great beyond, one supposes, and are then placed in this position of mentoring these pre-life souls. So, yeah, it's an interesting idea of the afterlife.
Yeah, and again, with a lot of that, and I guess this is why, the elements of practical New Age stuff, the transcendental meditation and astral projection was more disturbing, is because all these elements, while they're consistent with a number of views, the white light at the end of the tunnel is what we get from near-death experiences. Sometimes it's a metaphor everybody's familiar with, but these other elements are, while used for comedy, they are also consistent with a New Age worldview. So you see these, they believe in ascended masters within most of the New Age. So it would be these people who've ascended to such a level that they've moved beyond things, but they're trying to help bring other people up with them. So, these mentors kind of fit that idea, as well as this whole idea of progress to get from the pre-life to the life. And then there's this sense that Joe has to discover what his meaning is, which I give the movie credit. I like its overall message of, life is not just about what you do or accomplishing this or that. It's about enjoying it along the way too. I think that's a timely message that was certainly a good thing we were able to pull from this.
Yeah, it's
But
difficult to figure out whether they were saying that you're born with sort of a purpose, um, or you're born with kind of a fixed focus to life that is fixed in the pre-life, or it almost seemed like they kind of were slipping into the end, like, oh no, we're not giving people goals or purposes for life. But then they didn't expand on that I saw. So I was like, yeah, it seems like they were headed in a good direction with that, but they didn't finish the point.
right, it left it kind of very confused, and I think that's why I saw it as consistent with New Age, in that it's this learning and growing process to ascend to the next level. Uh, so that was there, but there was also this element of life not having a real meaning. So it almost had this nihilistic perspective kind of tagged on.
Yeah, I think that's probably consistent with sort of the cultural milieu at this point, where it's this radical libertarianism that you make your own purpose. Every choice you make is right to you, and that the only wrong thing in the world is to restrict the freedom and choices of other people. Um, so just as long as my fist doesn't hit your face, everything is permissible, kind of thing. Um, but the famous jazz person that he auditions for, he actually eventually ends up going to, and performing with her. So there's a spoiler there. And at the end, it's been his life's dream and goal this whole time to go and be a professional jazz musician. And so he has his first performance. His life goal has been achieved, and he's feeling disappointed. And so he tells her that, and she gives him this metaphor. She says, okay, so there was this fish who was swimming through the water and came up to another fish and said, I'm looking for the ocean. Can you tell me where the ocean is? And the other fish says, well, the ocean's what you're in right now. And the first fish says, no, what I'm in right now is water. What I want to find is the ocean. And she left it there. I was like, that sounds profound, but
Yeah, it just leaves in kind of this place where it's so convoluted in trying to make a view that's not offensive of what happens when you die, and yet it tries to find this deep meaning. But when you try to find deep meaning in
I think we're
something that
back with
has,
Caleb.
what was that? Uh-oh. Can y'all see me? Am I still
I
here?
can hear you. Yeah, Clinton's the one who doesn't seem to be with us right now.
Okay, maybe we're about to lose Clinton.
Well, he's moving. He's there. It's just I don't know if he can hear us right now.
You guys can't hear me?
Yeah,
I can hear you. You just stopped talking.
Oh, I mean, I wasn't really talking, other than to say that I was having a hard time hearing Caleb.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. All the technical glitches, fun stuff.
Okay, yeah, because I keep hearing Caleb sounding kind of like robotic, like he keeps slowing down, and I'm thinking, well, maybe it's my audio, maybe there's something going wrong with my, my Wi-Fi or something. But
It's probably on your end, because I'm typically the one with the bad internet, and Caleb's just fine for me.
Okay, well then it's probably my on my end.
Oh well, no need to play blame here.
You're making a point there, Caleb, is that the movie did a masterful job of being profound without actually saying anything. It's they did a really good job, I think, of making it look as if they were really saying something profound, but they made it ambiguous enough that it didn't offend anybody.
Right, and that's ultimately, I think, one of the biggest problems with it is the fact that when you're holding to no worldview, how do you even try to begin collecting meaning from something that's such a hodgepodge and an effort to not ground any of these claims?
Well, I think it would be a mistake for getting meaning from a cartoon in the first place. But have you ever heard of dudism?
Yes, I have. Just a little bit.
Clinton, you?
I don't believe so.
Okay, so have you ever seen the great shoot? What's the name of the movie called?
The Big Lebowski.
The Big Lebowski. Thank you. Have you seen it?
Oh, no, but I know one of the characters is called the Dude,
Right,
and
Jeff.
and I'm familiar with one quote. That's just like, well, your opinion, man.
Yeah, and his motto is "The Dude abides."
Right. Yeah.
And so Judaism is sort of a new agey religion that bases itself off of that character and his philosophy in that movie. And my point in saying all of that is it's probably not a great idea to get your religious beliefs from a movie.
Right.
I mean, I think that should be kind of obvious, but the fact of the matter in this world today, especially given the advancements in technology, we collect and build our worldview around a hodgepodge of ideas we're presented with, and we think, that sounds good. I'm going to take some of that. I'm going to take some of this. And that's how a lot of people's worldviews tend to develop. Movies certainly have a profound emotional impact on people. And I think it's one of the things we've missed out on as Christians is we should have gotten out there and been at the forefront of technology so we could make movies that have a profound impact and show the emotional and the theological and the historical strength of Christianity while at the same time presenting an excellent story. But we don't. We get movies like God's Not Dead and, name any other Christian movie and you're in the same boat.
Yeah,
so I think,
I've sometimes wondered if it's just sort of symptomatic of Christianity as a construct that it's impossible to make good entertainment out of it. But then, if I think about the history of culture, some of your best symphonies and works of literature were written by Christians from sort of if you think of Dante's Inferno or Milton's Paradise Lost,
Yeah.
or Handel's Messiah.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely not impossible to make good entertainment from a Christian perspective. Obviously they're the ones that you mentioned. In fact, for a long time, most of the great art being created was Christian. So yeah, it's just somewhere along the way, Christians kind of lost the creative spark, and we've allowed the non-religious society to kind of take over and imbue their worldview into entertainment. But there's some entertainment being produced by Christians, which has been pretty good. Obviously there's the stock examples of bad Christian cinema, like God's Not Dead. Then you have movies like The Case for Christ, which I thought was actually a pretty good movie for a faith-based film. It was definitely a step above what you usually see from faith-based movies. But when I think of a film with a good Christian message, I don't know if any of you ever saw Bruce Almighty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Bruce Almighty, I thought was a great film. If it wasn't for the swearing and the sexual content, I'd actually show it in church. So, but yeah, so a movie like that, I thought was a great movie with a great Christian message, but it had some objectionable content because it was made by Hollywood. But I think that it's definitely possible. The problem is a lot of times, Christians try to jump in without having the requisite knowledge, if you, obviously, because if you want to start out doing let's take movie making as an example. If you want to make movies, making movies costs a lot of money. And, the problem is to save money, a lot of corners are cut. Like the people who make the movies will often try to act the parts themselves when they don't have any acting experience. They have never had any acting lessons. They just try to act it out, and it comes across insincere, and the acting is bad because of that. We've gotten away from that for a bit. Like God's Not Dead obviously had Kevin Sorbo, in one of the lead roles as the antagonist. So there have been some improvements in these areas, but Christians still have kind of a long way to go, and it's because they, you know, they often just try to do things themselves without actually having the knowledge for it. And you know, I'm a musician myself, and I have aspirations as a musician that require a lot of money. So you know, I sympathize with that. But the problem is, you know, if you want to make a product that's comparable to what they're producing in the secular realm, you know, you have to. You know, it takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of people who know what they're doing. You know, you can't just if you don't have any experience or knowledge, you can't just try and do something yourself and expect it to be respected by by people who consume media.
Yeah, so I think that if you set off to make a work of entertainment that with a message, that you are bound to make something that's cringeworthy, regardless of what the message is. Because you can get the same kind of cringe out of some sort of woke film nowadays that's really trying to, put out a enlightened woke message, as you do for a Christian movie that's trying to put out an enlightened Christian message.
Yeah, no doubt. The recent Ghostbusters 2016 comes to mind. It was a terrible film because it was woke first, and then they try to do everything else around that. And so, it was bad for the same reason a lot of faith-based films are bad, because you're putting the message first, and everything else is kind of an afterthought. When in fact it kind of needs to be the other way around. There's nothing really wrong with having a message, but number one, people don't like to be preached at. That's true when they watch a Christian film, just like it's true when they watch a feminist film or something with woke philosophy or something like that. People don't like to be preached at, so you need to be a lot more subtle with it. But Christian films always have something in common, like the atheist who's being ministered to, will die near the end and come to faith at the last minute, or will have a loved one die and have a coming to faith moment or something like that. It's all too like wrapped up neatly in a bow by the end, and it doesn't really reflect real life. So that's something that I think faith-based filmmakers need to learn, is subtlety, because films are a visual medium, and so probably the number one rule of filmmaking is show, don't tell. I think of there's a recent movie that was real popular among pro-life people, but I think it's because they're just not as critical about media as I am. There's that movie about Unplanned, which is about Abby Johnson's journey to becoming a pro-life activist. And the movie was, it had a few good things to it. It had a couple of good scenes, but for the most part, it was a bad movie. It was poorly acted. It had a snidely whiplash, mustache twirling villain. It had, and probably the most egregious thing was, rather than just kind of showing everything happening, there was a narrator who would basically just be narrating everything that was happening on screen, and it was way too much, way overbearing. What's that?
Morgan Freeman.
No, it would have been tolerable if it was Morgan Freeman, but it was the lead actress who was doing the narration. But yeah, I mean, she was just narrating everything that was happening on screen. It's like, we're already seeing it. You don't have to tell us. Show it to us. Don't tell us. Narration isn't always a bad thing, but you can't rely on it for your whole movie like that one did. So there are a lot of things that faith-based filmmakers need to learn as far as actually making a good product.
Yeah, it's the difference between Lord of the Rings and Narnia, right?
I'm not sure. I like both. Well, I mean, I actually prefer Narnia over Lord of the Rings. I'm not sure what comparison you're trying to draw, though.
Well, Narnia is none too subtle in the sort of Christian elements that it brings into the plot, and it all, several of the books at least are, allegories for some specific Christian message. Versus Lord of the Rings, which
right.
Here's what I will say. I will say, if you want to make good Christian entertainment, write something that's entertaining, and do it from your own perspective. That way you're bringing your Christianity to the thing, but you're not making it the point of the thing. And I think that's what Tolkien did. I think that he was a Christian. He wrote a really inspired piece of entertainment, and he did it from his own sort of convictions and viewpoint, but he didn't make it the point of the entertainment.
Right.
Yeah, you see that there's a couple good examples of that. The primary one that comes to mind, my favorite Christian movie, if you will, probably the last, well, my whole life, is this I believe it's Korean horror film called The Wailing, and it is a brilliant piece of Christian filmmaking. To give away any more would probably ruin the movie, because it's worth the 3-hour journey in this movie. But the other example that comes to mind that brings up a pretty good parallel between Soul is Doctor Strange. While it certainly pulled in New Age elements, I think what came through more clearly was the director Scott Derrickson is a Christian, and I think that actually came through and kind of bled onto the movie in such a way that I didn't find the New Agey spirituality concepts to be as disturbing, because it had this overarching Christian kind of message and feel kind of behind it. So while these elements were there, they were, again, kind of like we were talking about, a plot device, and it wasn't consistently kind of the worldview that seemed to be captured in the movie. And I think that was what really captures the difference between Soul and something like Doctor Strange.
Yeah, one of the pieces of media that I really appreciated as a Christian was definitely not done from a Christian worldview that I'm aware of, and it isn't a particularly Christian movie, but the movie Watchmen. Either of you ever see that?
Yeah, but it's been a while. I don't remember much about it.
Here is the thing that really appealed to me as a Christian from that movie. First of all, I think it was a really accurate portrayal of the human condition, and you would not leave that movie thinking that humans are good at heart, that we're all basically good. It really puts on display the fact that humans are corrupt at heart, that there's this lack of goodness that is core to our being, and that whatever good things that we have are stacked on top of that. And the movie leaves you with this real, you walk away desiring a hero, because there were none in that movie. It left me with a real ache or desire for a savior, a Jesus-like savior, a person who could actually come in and imbue good into a corrupt world. And so I really felt inspired at that end to it. It's the same as it is with one of my favorite secular songs. Clinton, you might be familiar with this one. Do you know Cage the Elephant's Ain't No Rest for the Wicked?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. I like that song because for the same reason. It really puts on display the corruption of the human condition. And, this real need that we have, because if it left to our own devices, we are in pursuit of evil all the time, all of us, and we can't get out of that loop. There ain't no rest for the wicked, and there's this desire for rest.
I don't know. The song's okay. I'm just not really a fan of it. More from a songwriting perspective than anything else. It really sounds like they had like this cool idea for a chorus and then tried to write a song around the chorus, and it just didn't work for me.
Worked for me.
The lyrics are fine, but yeah.
No, and there was a progression to the plot of the song, I felt. It starts at one point, ends at another, and there's progress made between the 2 points. And it puts on display sort of the 3 essential kinds of corruption of human nature. So, to me, it was a well-structured poem from that perspective, from the thing that really compels me about it.
Yeah, and I guess that's ultimately probably the biggest problem for Soul, is that it barely captures kind of a good feeling kind of message, but it doesn't have any of that. And I like having things like that in the movies, especially the ones we watch as a family, because I would much rather have something that maybe is a little more provocative than most people would show their kids. If we can have a good conversation and it gives them something memorable to tie to a key idea. And we didn't have that here.
Yeah, I think Soul was a nothing burger. There was, it was empty movie calories. It was a fun movie to watch. You enjoyed it, but there was no takeaway from it. And I feel like that was probably intentional on the part of the creators because it's a spiritual movie. And if there's any kind of takeaway given, that, that is possibly alienating one part of your audience. So from a film writing perspective, I think it was a good move.
So they weren't trying to push a specific worldview with this film?
Yeah, I have a hard time not seeing it pushing New Age views to a certain extent. But again, I've given my argument for that, so I'm not going to go through all that again.
All right.
The one thing that, they could have done, which they didn't, and I don't blame them, is to resolve the question that they brought up in the beginning is it better to, risk everything and follow your dream, or to, take the security and sacrifice these dreams that you have for, security and well-being of others. And so, obviously most films would go the follow your dreams route. And it almost seems like this film left that kind of hanging in the direction that you could argue that no, you do the things that's safe and secure and, brings out the better result, not risk it all for following the dream. And there was a lot of risk left for the following the dream thing. I mean, he dies as soon as he gets the gig.
Yeah. And, I guess that is a relatively good point as well, is that it really did kind of buck the idea of follow your dreams, in the extent that just like the concept of love has been so Disney-fied, so that it's this idea of, Prince Charming and Princess whoever. And, it's this idea that's just taken our whole concept of love and twisted it into something that leaves no room for the choice. Love is a daily choice. And it just destroys that concept. And I think you see the same thing kind of here with the concept of dreams, in that it would be good to have a balanced approach, to say there's rooms for dreams, but they're not everything. And it like you said, it kind of almost goes there, but it doesn't entirely.
Yeah. With each sense, there was the girl from his middle school music class that, started out really inspired by the music, but then she comes back and says, this isn't speaking to me. And there was this kind of moment of bonding between her and the, other girl. But it didn't resolve the question of, well, should she pick it up and follow the dream again? And then there was that moment, that kind of thing they dropped in at the end of, no, we don't give a life a purpose here.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like the movie left room in the door, left a crack in the door to allow for the fact that, this whole follow your dream thing might be a destructive message, not a constructive message.
Yeah, that's true.
If so, that would be kind of a surprising thing to come from a Hollywood film.
Well, again, it wasn't obvious. It was subtle.
And with this, one thing I want to touch on before we wrap up, definitely is just kind of a practical takeaway for people. I personally am of the mindset that we watch a lot of stuff that other families may not feel comfortable with their kids watching. That's okay. But we watch things that we try and find that have meaning and significance and messages, even controversial ones, if we can use it as an opportunity to talk about it. And we certainly tried to do that here as well. My kids would point out as we went through the movie, well, that's not right. And they did that a few times, not obnoxious kind of level, interruptions, but they were recognizing the spiritual aspects of the movie. And we sat down and had a discussion about it afterwards. And I think with this, that's what's most critical with a movie like this is you have to sit down and have the conversation. Well, what did you think of it? What kind of view was this movie kind of giving of things? Was it consistent? The same kind of conversation we've had tonight is the same kind of one I had with my kids. Of course, we didn't go down all the same roads. We didn't talk about monism versus dualism, but we talked about the elements that were spiritually inaccurate, talked about some of the positive messages of the movie. But most importantly, I wanted my kids to take away from it. This is a movie where ideas are being brought in. Some of them may be consistent with the Christian worldview, some of them may not. And so we need to think critically about those things when we watch a movie like this and recognize that just because it's touting a spiritual view does not mean it's a good one. Any other parenting thoughts on this film?
I didn't find the film bothersome that my kids were watching it and I was watching it. I watched that with them, and I didn't walk away thinking, "Oh no, they've been deceived. They're gonna." Yeah, I feel like they just enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want people to swing the pendulum too far to the other side either, to the fact that you can't get enjoyment from a movie like this. It's entertainment. It's geared to be enjoyable. Of course, it has a worldview attached to it of some kind. Whether or not we know that is beside the point. But if we can enjoy it and have those kind of conversations, that's what I find works best for my family in terms of helping kids process these things. And that way, we also have conversations about, maybe this is not something that, you throw on your friends with this when discussing this movie. Don't just trash it. Tell them what you enjoyed about it. Then ask questions about what they thought about things. But it takes a lot of balance, and it's a challenge as a parent. I think these kind of movies, particularly a lot of the Disney ones as of late, present some interesting challenges in parenting as to how you address this as a parent and the decisions you make with it. I know a lot of people will probably avoid this film because they see the convoluted spiritual or even new age messages. I don't think that's the right approach either. I think these things need to be approached very head on. I think the only other wrong way to do it is to just flip this on and leave it as something that's just a kid thing. If I hadn't watched this, I wouldn't have thought of not watching it with my kids, or at least within, a very close vicinity to them, just because when they have questions or thoughts about it, I want to be able to there and be able to address that with them.
Yeah, it would be easy to go the route of Harry Potter has witchcraft in it, therefore it's evil and children shouldn't read it, kind of thing. And I don't, I think that's an overreaction, and I think it would be an overreaction to not let your kids watch this movie because there's a new age guru in it. It's not the point, and it doesn't really push that perspective that I consider.
And I think that's fair. Yeah, I would agree with you there. Any other thoughts or elements anybody wants to talk about before we wrap up?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Well, I know you haven't seen it yet, Clinton, but based on your experience tonight, on a scale of 1 to 7 souls, how many souls would you give this movie?
4 souls.
Okay. Joel?
Let's see. I'm going to compare it to other Pixar movies. I would say that this movie is better than Up, but not quite as good as Inside Out.
I think that's fair. I definitely enjoyed some of the aspects of this movie, particularly the, kind of overall message of, enjoy life and your experiences and don't get so caught up in dreams that, you're missing the beauty of life itself. That was really good. Didn't like the new age elements tied in, so I'd probably be somewhere in the 2 to 3 soul range, maybe 3.5 if you catch me on a really emotional day, where the message just hits home better than usual. So
Yeah, there was definitely a sort of live in the moment, make the best of each moment kind of thing, versus, I don't know, becoming overly obsessed with the future.
yeah, that's true. Well, I think that was pretty good. Right on an hour and a half for our discussion on Soul. Hope listeners found it worthwhile. Hopefully, we were able to add something to your processing of this movie so that you can take it back and use it with your family, or maybe you're thinking more deeply about these things yourself. So before we wrap up, I'm going to give everybody their 15 seconds to make a spiel as to where to find content. Clinton, you want to start off?
Sure. Well, you can find me on Facebook and MeWe, just to search my name. You can find me on Parler at Pro-Life Philosophy and Twitter at Clinton_Wilcox. And I host a podcast called Pro-Life Thinking. You can find the audio-only podcast on iTunes and at blogtalkradio.com/prolifethinking. And you can also find us on YouTube at the Pro-Life Thinking YouTube channel. We do a video portion there. The purpose of the podcast is to train people how to make the pro-life case effectively and persuasively. And so if you want to get the most out of it, then you'll definitely want to pay attention to both the audio podcast and the video portions on YouTube, because there is and will be content unique to both.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Joel?
So I'll go ahead and mention that I have a website, joelfurchess.com. And the reason I mention that is because I am posting some of my research on that website. And so if you're interested in the research, it's there. I also have my artwork portfolio on there. I don't know if we discuss it very often, but I'm an artist, and so my portfolio is on that website. I just, 2 days ago, started a YouTube channel for my research. I've got 2 videos on there so far. One of the videos is an assessment of the 10 questions that we did on this live stream last time, right?
Yeah.
10 questions last. Okay, yeah. I took those questions and I applied my research to them. Rather than answering them from my own biography, I applied, the statistics and information from my research to it. And then I also took a video series we did a while ago on the Mentionables. And this was signs that you might be an atheist one day. And I looked at them and, discussed whether these were actual signs that you might be an atheist one day, because I happen to know a little bit about that. So yeah, and that's Switching Sides, like all my other stuff. So if you look that up on YouTube, I've got 2 videos there. I'm working on another one right now about the history of a cult that inspired one of the most formidable models of conversion in all of conversion history. So that'll be interesting, because it's an interesting cult. I'll send that your way, Caleb.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. You got me excited about that one.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting that one out, and then we'll have that posted.
Cool.
And so that's...
All right. And aside from right here, you can check out Question Christianity. YouTube, Facebook, either one. We're getting ready to drop a video in a couple days. We've been doing happy hours every other Monday, where we sit down and take questions. And we're getting ready to drop a video short on the Enneagram and should Christians be involved with the Enneagram personality test. So check that out over at Question Christianity. But while you're here, subscribe, hit notifications, and all the websites, or at least all the YouTube channels just mentioned, you should find links to here on our Mentionable page as one of the recommended channels. So you can find the channels that way as well. So hope you'll subscribe, give us a like, give us a dislike, and give us feedback. We love feedback. So
yeah, start mentioning in the comments. We do follow those, and you might be able to get your favorite mentionable to engage in dialogue with them.
Yeah, by the way, Clinton, Mark was really impressed that you forgot his name in our last episode. So,
I was hoping that he doesn't listen to our podcast, but I guess he does.
yeah, he commented pretty quick on that one.
Oh, did he?
Yep. Wish I could pull it up here. Yeah, it was just you forgot my name! Exclamation point! Exclamation point!
Yeah, Mark, if you're listening, I apologize. It's been a while since you've been on the podcast, and I just haven't seen your name. I just tend to be bad with names. I remembered your first name, but yeah.
All right. Well, on that awkward note, we will bring the show to a close. Hope everybody has a great night, and hopefully you found something valuable in this discussion. Until next time.